New York's Attorney General wants the state legislature to pass a law banning the live streaming of homicides.
It follows a scathing report that her office released suggesting social media helped radicalize the Buffalo grocery store gunman. Back in May, 10 black people died and 3 others were injured at a mass shooting at a Tops grocery store. Officials argue that the suspect used social media to plan and promote the attack.
For more, let's bring in senior investigative reporter with the Southern Poverty Law Center, Michael Edison Hayden. Michael, thanks so much for being here. It's good to see you in person.
Hey, nice to see you.
What are the key points in this report, and what were investigators looking at to come to the findings?
Okay, so, I think the fundamental problem that they're looking at here is that these live streamed mass murders, I think most exemplified by the Christchurch shooter in March of 2019, are this phenomenon where there's this feedback loop between communities, online communities, radicalizing people, and these people performing mass murder events to the community. It's a real kind of contemporary problem. It's a problem we've never encountered before, I think. And what they're trying to do is get a handle on this new situation and try to do something about it. But with that comes obviously a lot of complexity.
Yeah, and oh, sorry.
I was going to say, you mentioned, and it's an interesting point that you brought up. In this report, the state AG's investigators found that the suspect in the Buffalo shooting did actually view a clip from the Christchurch shooting,
right,
which they're indicating may have been some sort of inspiration.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that's happening here, if you recall, for example, in the era kind of before Trump's rise to power, and there was a lot of white supremacist, a lot of conversation about white supremacism and the rise of that online. There were, of course, mass shootings. There were tons of them. But what's happened recently are these shootings that are kind of based on propaganda, this great replacement propaganda focused on demonizing non-white people and non-white immigration. And there's been a copycat scenario playing out with shooters like from El Paso, where 24 people were murdered. And of course, in Christchurch, as we mentioned, and of course, in Buffalo in May. And these are really horrific events that, once again, we're just trying to get a handle on because it's such a new phenomenon. It's kind of a growing perversion of social media.
Yeah, and not to mention, in addition to the abhorrent copycats, but just even for these families to be witnessing the last moments of their loved ones' lives in such a horrific manner. Michael, New York's Attorney General wants unregulated social media companies to be held accountable. She calls them breeding grounds for white supremacy. We were discussing that this seems like a good step to take in theory to crack down on it. Do you think it can actually be accomplished?
So, well, the first thing I wanted to say about this is, our organization is very concerned about free speech. We actually have a lot of people who are trying to stop us from speaking, either through threats of violence, threats of lawfare, things like that. So this is complicated for us, right? We are in the business of also defending free speech and our right to call people extremists. So let's just say that for one thing. On the other hand, what we're seeing here is not necessarily an open field of free speech. And that's part of the problem we're talking about with social media. This is not a town square where people take turns speaking. There are algorithms involved. There are sometimes, sometimes that tilt in a very reactionary way. There are also these kind of copycat, smaller versions of social media sites where there's absolutely no regulation, and these feedback loops that go from mainstream websites like Twitter into these darker forums, these forums that most people never heard of or ever go to. So some of that is going on here. Now, in regards to this particular legislation, what it can actually do, I think if extremists are sharing this content for the purpose of further terrorizing a community that is already in the middle of terror, and you have to imagine the horror of your own child, your loved one, your husband, your wife, killed in an event like this. Right, and to see it played out. If they're using these videos in order to further torment and terrorize those people, I think that civil litigation is appropriate. Of course, it's vaguely worded, and we don't know how it's going to play out. But if you look at something similar, if you look at the way Alex Jones of InfoWars tormented the grieving families of the Sandy Hook mass shooting back in 2021, and that civil lawsuit, which I think most people are, I think, praising right now, with some exceptions, that seems to me to be justified.
How are social media companies responding?
I mean, I think that any time that social media is put on the defensive like this, there are going to be, there's going to be a lot of concern, I think, from them about what they're broadcasting. But also at the same time, they are have created avenues for radicalization that they have never really addressed, and usually done it with a model of profit. It's not necessarily their model is not necessarily based on we're going to turn everyone into this group of people into reactionary mass murderers. They're focused on keeping people on the platform, keeping people tethered to the platform, keep people watching live streams, keep people sharing content, and this is the kind of fallout from that. So this is this long process for them to kind of come to terms with it.
It was interesting. I was thinking about the Alex Jones case as you were speaking, which I just covered his trial last week, and his defense lawyer was arguing even after the jurors decided nearly $1 billion settlement, or verdict. Free speech isn't without boundaries, and defamation is a real thing. And I think that case set a precedent. But do you think this is another instance where we'll see a new precedent set?
I think it's possible. I mean, I think that the really, so we do have limitations about things. For example, things like child pornography, for example, right? Which is just like a hard red line. We don't broadcast that, on social media. It can be, there's a lot of, there are punishments attached to something like that. Now, this is sort of new territory, and we're sort of feeling it out a little bit. People may argue there's a journalistic component to some of this stuff. I would say, certainly on a personal level, I would strongly advocate anybody who is coming across this and thinks that it is beneficial to share in a journalistic sense, that or these screeds that they call manifestos, these racist rants that get that glorified term. If you're thinking about sharing those things, I would strongly advise you not to do it, and to give, not to give these people, any kind of lift. We've gotten the habit of not even saying their names, of course. Yeah. But it is possible that this, again, if used for the purpose of further harassing people who are already in distress, I think that, again, could meet that mark.
All right, Michael Hayden, thank you.
Thank you very much.